Awesome. Hello, everyone. I'm just letting people in as we go now. Please bear with me. It's just me this evening. We've had various people off, so just me running the tech, doing everything. It's lovely to have so many of you here and in person on this kind of gloomy evening. Do feel free to use the chat while you're here. Everything here is off the record, but it would be lovely to hear a little bit more about who we've got in here, what kind of stage you're at, and I'll keep half an eye on that as we go through, just so I can make sure I'm hopefully saying the most relevant things and tailoring this to you the best I can. We do have all of your questions there that got sent through in advance, so don't panic there. But equally, if something does come up in the process of the next half an hour, 40 minutes while I'm talking, do feel free to pop that into the chat as well, and we will try and get through as many as possible. We do have, what else do I need to tell you? Normally there are other people here. We do have closed captions available as well, so if you need them, just click on the CC button, which should be on that bar at the bottom of your Zoom screen, so do feel free to send those as well. We are also recording this session, so you will also get this back. So if your Wi-Fi goes down, if you need to drop out, if you miss anything, you will get that, and you will also get the slides as well. So I think that roughly covers any kind of housekeeping, but again, do feel free. I am here for the whole time I'm speaking, obviously. Do feel free to pop anything in the chat or DM me directly. So yes, today, I'm going to be talking about finding journalism jobs, building a strategy, all of those kind of things around kind of maybe taking the next step in your career or your first step in your career. So again, I know I've just said this, but it'd be really super useful if you could kind of maybe mention where you're roughly at. It'd be good to know what kind of split we've got in here in terms of people maybe looking for their first job versus maybe second, third or fourth. So yeah, maybe do pop that in the chat if you get a mo. So my name's Jem. I am the founder and director of Journo Resources, and have also worked staff and freelance at various other places along the way. So I am the person who lists quite a lot of the job ads that we do. I speak directly to some of the employers that we list job ads for and work with them on how to write job adverts to attract the best people and best practice to do so. And I've also done a little bit of hiring on the other side myself. So I've been the person literally going through 100, 200, even 300 CVs and applications. So hopefully we'll be able to bring with you a little bit of knowledge from both of those experiences that I can share with you this evening. So what I'm going to go through, hopefully for roughly the next 30, 40 minutes, we'll see how long we get along. I'm going to talk about building a job strategy, so thinking about what kind of jobs you might want to apply for and where you might find them and how long you might spend applying for them. I'm going to talk a little bit about finding jobs, so how you might actually go about being a little bit more strategic in finding them. Then actually making that application and putting it in and helping yourself to stand out. And then throughout, I'm going to be talking about some skills in demand as well. So that's less of a point for, but more kind of sprinkled in without. And I have put some space at the end for questions. So please do put anything in the chat as we go along, or equally, I do have all of those that you asked in advance. So to kick off, I wanted to talk first of all about building a job hunting strategy. So if any of you have ever come to any of these workshops before, I've probably mentioned the kind of light bulb moment that I had, maybe, I think it was 2 years ago I first started doing this. But I always thought, you know, there are so many people who are telling me that they're applying for jobs, they're not getting anywhere. They say they're looking at everything. And I just thought, oh, hang on, you know, what's going on there? And I thought, well, hang on, I've got a jobs board. I can see exactly what people are looking for. And where they're most interested, where they're least interested. So I decided to do a little bit of digging. As I say, I've been doing this for the last 3 years now, and broadly the results come up the same. So here I'm going to do entry level first, and then I will go to what I've called next step or senior level jobs, so people who are looking for that kind of next step in their career. But this is for last year, so this is across the whole of 2022 from January to December. These were the 10 most looked at jobs on the Journo Resources website. There are all a very similar vibe, I think. The ones next up who just dropped off that top 10 were again all very similar. So things like sifted.eu had an editorial assistant job. There's a trainee broadcast assistant at TalkSport. Even some trainees and internships that spiked online got over 1,000 views, which I thought was a wild one. But generally, I think you can probably see, well, the thing that I picked out from this, the two big themes here, from my perspective, were big names and traineeships. So at an entry level, the thing that everyone is looking for, everyone is applying for, is anything that comes from a big name. You've got the Daily Mail there, the Evening Standard, the FT, the Google News Initiative, that covered loads of different outlets, but all again at that top tier. And a lot of these here as well are also very clearly traineeship schemes or entry level, and they've really labelled that in the title. So editorial graduate programme, graduate scheme, trainee reporter scheme. And I think that is definitely the most, the one thing I would point out from those entry level jobs is that people say it's really hard to get in, and I absolutely do agree. And I have spent so much time looking at the data and applying for things myself as well. But everyone is kind of concentrated on the same kind of things. And this is not to say, and I don't show anyone this data to kind of put people off and go, oh my gosh, 2,000 people looked at the Telegraph graduate scheme. What chance do I have? Absolutely not. This is not why I'm showing you this. But the reason I think it's useful to see this is because if you know which things are popular, which jobs that you're potentially interested in applying for that are really attracting quite a lot of people, then you can start to be a little bit strategic in your job hunt, and you can go, okay, well, there are 10 on this page alone, 10 different graduate schemes or 10 different apprenticeships, 10 different trainee schemes. Which are the ones that I really want to apply for? I know they're going to be popular, so let's pick the 2 or 3 that I really actually have an affinity to, and I think that will be really useful for my career and my career trajectory. What are they? And then when you've identified them, actually spending a really decent chunk of time on them because they're going to be popular. I'll talk a little bit about this later, but I would say, having been the person looking through job applications at all levels, both entry level all the way through up to more senior roles, I would say 99% of people don't go that extra 1%. So actually, if you've got that knowledge to say, I know that this is going to be a really popular job, I'm going to spend a little bit more time on it and really do it well, it's not that hard to get past that final first pass. So if you have this information, that can be the start of a more strategic job hunt for you. And the other thing I will add here as well is that these are just views. So that isn't 2,000 people applying. That's just the number of people looking at those roles. So that's one thing, take into account what's more popular, think about that strategically. I'll spend a bit more time on it. Of course, the flip side of that is if all of those things are the most popular, the things that are big names and have trainee titles, and it's really clear that they're a learning opportunity, what's at the bottom? So these were a couple of the things which were at the bottom of our popular jobs in 2022. There's a whole bunch of stuff in here. But I roughly think that this kind of falls into 4 buckets, if you kind of take that list as a whole. And the 4 buckets that I kind of roughly put it into, and this has been the trend, has been exactly the same for the last 3 years that I've been doing this, is that there are B2B and specialist jobs, so business to business magazines, where you are not necessarily talking to the public, but talking to a specific business. There are social media, SEO and digital jobs. I find this one the most baffling. This is something that, especially at entry level, you are most skilled to do and can take that knowledge in. Journalism adjacent, I bucket that in with anything that's like marketing, comms, all of those kind of, press officer, all of those things. And then local and regional jobs. I would say all of those 4 are the ones that typically we tend to see in the bottom kind of in terms of the amount of people looking at them. And if you look at the difference in numbers here, like it really can be really stark. You've got, say, like 55 people looking at the lowest compared to almost 2,000 people looking at the most popular job on our site. And if you go even, I don't know, let's say that 200 people applied for that Telegraph editorial graduate programme, if you think about maybe like the conversion rate. But even if every single person applied for the least viewed job on our website, there would be so much less competition that you would be facing. So I guess the point of this is to show you that 1, there's a real way that you can be strategic here, and 2, just to maybe get you to think about some other things, especially at entry level, that might be a different way in. People come to us all the time and say, I've been applying for, hundreds and hundreds of jobs and I just apply for everything. And I am sure that loads of people are. But I can also see the back end of the website, and the back end of our website shows us that people aren't even looking at some of these jobs. They're not even considering it. And of course, there are pros and cons to all of these. As I say, these 4 buckets, there are pros and cons. Local and regional don't necessarily pay the best. Maybe some of these don't necessarily tick your dream box. But I know for a fact that people aren't looking at these and the competition isn't there. So it's worth thinking about, are some of these jobs potentially a stepping stone? That's not to say you have to be in that role forever, but could it be that you worked at a specialist publication for a while and that gave you the jump up to your dream national job, or whatever it is? Normally, when we do a slightly longer version of this workshop, I really try and hammer this point home and have case studies of people who did all 4 of these things and look at where they went to. But I won't do that today because we're a little bit pushed on time. But I really would implore you to think about these 4 areas and think, could this be something that works for me? And could it get me to where I need to go? They all have they're all very good ways of getting you somewhere else, and it doesn't necessarily mean you have to stick there. And also to pick out the social media, SEO and digital in particular, when we analysed the top skills that came up again and again, we basically chucked in every job advert that we'd done or had listed last year, and social and digital media came out as one of the top things that employers were looking for, but it contrastingly was one of the job adverts that people were looking at least. So yeah, 2 things to think about there. And so at a kind of next level step, so if you are looking for maybe your 2nd, 3rd, 4th, whatever it is, job in the newsroom, things get a little bit more murky when it comes to the data that we have here at Journo Resources, mainly because we don't let anyone advertise a job without a salary. Even if you are the Times, the Sun, whoever you are, we're like, no, go away, no salary, no job advert. So that means that we don't necessarily have as much data as we do at entry level. And as a result, maybe this looks a little bit more, oh God, okay, does that tell me anything? Because there's a real mishmash here of things. You've got a press officer job in there. You've got kind of some B2B stuff in there. Maybe you're going, oh, what does this tell me? So I think maybe slightly anecdotally, and this is less concrete, as I say, because we have slightly less data. But a couple of things that I have taken from this and looking from this is that I think big names still typically do better. All of the times we have listed something that is typically a big name, again, that does better. That's not to say, obviously, maybe you've had that first job and maybe you know exactly where you're going and you want that next step job to be at a national paper. But it could be that it's worth thinking about if there is a step in between. Is there a step at a B2B or a trade publication or something that could get you there? The other thing is that all of these typically are very standard job titles in this top list. They all are news reporter or staff writer or something like that. And people are typically looking at the title and not necessarily looking at titles that might do exactly the same thing, but not necessarily, but might have a more obscure title. So people are really looking top level. And the final thing I can tell you here is that the conversion rates for these are much lower as well. So on that entry level page where you had, say, 2,000 people looking at some of those most popular jobs, quite a high percentage of those will go on to apply for that job. Not all of them, but it is much, much lower at the next step level. People do a lot more window shopping. So even though it says at the top, basically 1,000 people looked at our deputy editor job, we only had about 30 people apply. So the same kind of things still apply. There are a couple of people on this list as well. I won't name them, but there are a couple of employers on here who are in our top few jobs, but it wasn't a bad job, but they had to relist it a couple of times with us because they still couldn't find the right person. So I guess what I would take from this is that big names still do better. People do focus on jobs that have stereotypical names in the title, but there are so many that we list which have a slightly different title but are doing exactly the same thing, but people aren't looking at them. And I think what you can also see is those 4 I guess underserved buckets of ones that people aren't looking at. These ones here are still not very represented in that top tier of those top 10 jobs at next step level either. You're still not seeing many people looking at those next step jobs, which do exist both in regional and local locations, those next step jobs that exist in social media. And obviously that makes sense, right? Because the funnel of people just gets smaller. If not a lot of people are looking at them at entry level, less people are going to be looking at them at next step level. So all in all, I would still take those same learnings basically if you're looking for your second or third job, and looking a little bit wider and looking beyond the job description. These are the least popular jobs that we found at the other end of the scheme. So I've removed a couple of duplicates on here. There were a lot of B2Bs, and I didn't want the whole list to be B2Bs because you kind of get the idea. But also a lot of stuff in Scotland. There were, just dropping off the list at the bottom, with some stuff like engagement editor, at Astra Content, head of social media at Hyphen. And some of these also really well paid jobs. I'm talking like 50, 60K. And if I don't particularly highlight that in the newsletter, that this is a really well paid job, no one's looking at it because it's one of those job titles that just doesn't seem to tick a box for people. So generally the same kind of stuff is happening here, where people are not looking beyond the job title. They're not necessarily looking at publications which aren't the Times, aren't the FT, aren't these really big hitters, and the competition is much fewer, less, I never know, if you go and expand your horizons in those kind of ways. So the reason I wanted to show you those two bits of data, and probably have laboured the point a little bit too much, is for two reasons. One, if you know what's popular, you can identify which things you really need to spend an amount of time on. I think we probably all know the stuff that I've just told you. I think we could have all guessed what the most popular jobs are, but actually I don't think very many of us use that to create a job strategy that really kind of is adaptive to, this is a popular job, I'm going to spend more time on it. So now you have that, think about that. Think about which ones you want to dedicate a little bit more time to. And the second thing is just to maybe think about broadening your scope, looking closer than just the job title, thinking about whether there are any other areas that are perhaps overlooked that could help you move forward. And just to stress again, this is not about finding your, dream job, but maybe it's about going, well, could this job help me get somewhere else? And as you can see here, the numbers are tiny. Some of these jobs are having so few people look at them. At entry level, quite often when we advertise regional and local jobs, sometimes editors come back to me like, oh, we're so happy, we've got like 10 applicants, and I'm like, wow, okay. The difference is so stark, and that's not to say that it will be the perfect job for you, but it's worth looking a little bit wider, and just thinking, could those jobs get you to where it is that you want to be? One of my favorite things that I typically tend to do is I do a little bit of kind of like LinkedIn digging, and quite often if you go and look at some of the people who are in the jobs you want to be in, actually you'll find surprising things about the B2B that they worked in between getting that job, or before it, or something equally kind of maybe less popular. So yeah, that's my short sell on why I'd urge you to think a little bit more widely about the jobs that you're looking for. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about how to find those jobs in the first place. So maybe this next point again will seem obvious, but one of the most common bits of feedback I get in the little box. So when people unsubscribe from our newsletter, we do a jobs newsletter every Tuesday. If you haven't signed up for it, please do, it's free. And one of the most common bits of feedback that we get when people unsubscribe, if they do write in the box, hardly anyone writes in the box, but the people that do write in the box say, oh, I'm unsubscribing from this because I'm not looking for a job anymore. I've just got another job. I'm really happy. And I don't need to see all this job stuff anymore. Probably don't need to tell you all this because you are already here, but I would profoundly disagree with this as a course of action. Even if you absolutely love your job, maybe you in 2 weeks time get a job and you're like, great, this is wonderful, and I'm not just saying this because I want to keep my subscribers high, but I have 3 reasons for this. Number one is your dream job won't wait. Don't miss it just because you weren't looking at that time. We have so many people that come to us and go, and we'll ask for advice, being like, oh, I've only been at this place 6 months, but this amazing opportunity has just come up, but I don't feel that I can't apply for it. I would absolutely say it's all about you. It's all about your career, what you feel is right for you rather than necessarily the company you're working for. So don't miss that by not looking, by not keeping your eye around and not looking. And you don't have to be looking in a kind of, it can be a very passive way that you're keeping an eye on this. And then if your dream job comes up, amazing, great. Jack, who sometimes does this workshop with me, now works for the Lego Group, previously was working at News UK, I think would very much agree that he wasn't necessarily actively looking, but because he was still signed up for those things, saw it, and that became somewhere where he's now been working for 4.5 years. The second reason is, I think, like, if you do get rid of all your newsletters, get rid of all your alerts, whatever it is that you're doing to search for jobs, restarting it becomes the whole thing. You'll put it off, it'll become an admin task, and you don't necessarily go into it with a positive frame of mind. It's a real burden. So actually just keeping all of those things running at all times, even if in a couple of weeks' time you get that dream job, keep it all there. Just keep it there so that you can absorb it, so that you can see it. And it'll also help you right now. In that current job that you're doing, knowing what others are being paid for the similar kinds of roles, knowing what kind of skills are in demand, can help you push for pay rises, promotions, ask for specific types of training courses, because you're aware of the market and you're being able to see what else is going on. So I would very much advise anyone and everyone in this room never to turn it off. Like, I have no interest in ever, well, I say I don't, who knows? I have no interest in applying for a full-time job anywhere. I am subscribed to every single newsletter that I could be. I read them all. I'm like, oh, that's an interesting job. And I would try and keep that with you as you go through your career, because it will give you a real knowledge and an understanding of the jobs market, which you won't necessarily get. And I think it can feel really intimidating if you jump in again after maybe taking some time off. So always kind of keep this on the back burner, passively have that stuff, looking through it on the bus on the way home, whatever it is. In terms of actually finding those jobs, this is a very text heavy slide, but again, I will send it over to you. These are just a couple of the places that I go to and I look through when I do the Journo Resources newsletter every week. I've put a ton in there. These are the ones I typically, literally every week, I write them all down in this notebook and I go through them all. So yeah, there's journalism specific ones, our jobs board, journalism.co.uk, Cision, Hold the Front Page, etc., etc. I tend to do a run through of all of those. Also worth, if there are any particular employers, bookmarking their portals as well. All of those places will also have newsletters. I am signed up to most of those. Maybe you don't need to go as extra as me because you're not necessarily writing a newsletter about it. But I would definitely make sure that you're at least signed up to our newsletter, Cision's newsletter. Media Beans has one that comes out on a Monday, and I've got a couple of others there which are maybe slightly more applicable for freelancing, but are a really good passive way to keep yourself involved. I've put LinkedIn as well. Again, I mentioned, I think maybe we're getting better at this as journalists. I feel like we have over the past 2-3 years, but I definitely feel there's still more that we could be doing with it, if that makes sense. I think sometimes we ignore it in favor of all of those amazing journalism specific job sites, and actually it will do 90% of the work for you if you actually start using the jobs portal on LinkedIn. The emails you get through where it's like, hey, this job's come up, become more and more scarily accurate. So do engage with it, do click on the things that you're interested, have a peek through on there. Like, I know a lot of people who have found roles through there without necessarily having to do anything. And I've also put in some of the Facebook groups in there as well. Probably the only thing that I currently still really use Facebook for, but are a really good, slightly less formal way to discover these opportunities, especially in some of those. So freelance media women, don't be put off by the title. It also includes staff roles as well. People will post in there saying my company is hiring, and it's a good way to get kind of an insight and ask questions and get a more personal introduction to those places. And I've also seen a lot of people introduce themselves in those kind of places and say, hey, I'm just starting out, or I'm looking for this change, and here's the kind of thing I'm looking for. And people are genuinely very helpful and do want to kind of give advice and say, oh, actually, we're looking for this. So I would spend a bit of time kind of lurking in those groups, putting yourself out there, asking questions, because I do genuinely find them very interesting. I'm sure, I mean, as a bit of show of hands in the chat, maybe, I'm sure most of you here are still on Twitter, but how many of you here are using TweetDeck? I don't know if you want to just put a quick yes or no in the chat while I have some water. Oh, someone says yes, that's always good. And there's no right, I say no right or wrong answer. Okay, this is generally what tends to happen. I always bang on about TweetDeck. And I would say maybe slightly more people saying yes than normal. Normally about 90% of people who have Twitter are like, no, I'm not really using it. But if you take one thing away from today, I'd really encourage you to spend 30 minutes setting up your tweet deck and sorting it. This is something that I use. This is just a screenshot because I didn't want to go too over the top because we only have a short amount of time in this session. But if you have a Twitter account, you have a TweetDeck account. You just go to tweetdeck.com or tweetdeck.twitter.com. And it will look something like this. I use this every single week to put together the newsletter. And I mean, I feel like the conversations have maybe quietened down at the moment about what the future of Twitter looks like. But I would definitely say for the moment, this is where I find 90% of all of the opportunities that go into our newsletter. And if you can really master TweetDeck and make it work for you, then you'll start to find opportunities before they go into those newsletters. So our newsletter, for example, currently has about 15,000 people on it. I imagine that the rest of them have similar numbers, maybe more. And I don't say that to be, again, to put anyone off, but to do that as a bit of an impetus to, if you can sort, I think a lot of the personalized newsletters that are run, say by like Sonia, Sharmeeds, etc., all will be using Twitter to find these opportunities. And if you can set it up yourself, then you're going to find it before everyone else sees it, and you can apply first. So there are a number of things you can do with this. The main things that I do, you can probably see those columns towards the right hand side. You can set up specific searches. I have a huge range of terms that my TweetDeck is ridiculous. I've set up a huge range of different things that I'm searching for. I basically just try and come up with a phrase that I think people will include in a tweet where they are advertising for work. And then that column will search all of Twitter, not just the people I'm following, and it will update in real time so that I can, every time I go and have a look at TweetDeck, it will sort it for me. So I have so many of them. I will share them with you, the ones that I use for freelancing. I haven't necessarily got too many for actual salaried jobs, but you'll get the idea by the ones that I share with you. And then I would advise you to just spend a bit of time thinking about what are the kind of jobs I'm looking for, what are those phrases, whack them in a tweet deck. And, you know, the more niche you go, the less tweets you see, but you'll be the first person to see it. And I tend to have a little bit of a mixture of really broad terms and really niche terms, which enable me to see all of the kind of things that I'm interested in. And it's just a process of thinking, what might someone write in a tweet if they're looking for work? Set it up in here, and then again, TweetDeck will do the work for you. And I just tend to check it, you know, for Journo Resources every day. But if it's if it's for you and it's part of your job hunt, you'll come up with a routine of how often to take a look at that. The other thing I tend to do with this is I've also set up a couple of Twitter lists as well. So you can make Twitter lists which are private, so no one knows that you've added them to it. And you can just pick all of the, say, careers accounts that you're particularly interested in looking for. So if you want to work for a broadcaster, you could make a list of BBC, ITV, STV, whoever it is, put them all in a list. It could be particular editors of publications, whatever it is, put them all in a private list. They won't know that you've been added to it. And again, that will be its own column in this tweet deck that you can come back to, where you'll just be able to see all of those tweets in one go. So yeah, if you take nothing away from this today, do go away. It only takes like half an hour to start setting something like this up. And then you can tweak it as you go along. And really kind of hone it to make it show you the things you are most interested in seeing. And this is what I use week in, week out. So I will share with you when we send out the pack. I do have a bit of a list for freelance pitches and some more general ones around finding jobs. So I'll send that out so you can kind of get a bit of an idea. But as I said, it's just about thinking, what might someone type? And then you can kind of put that into those columns, and you can be really specific as well. You can also say, I want ones that don't include this word. I want it from this time frame, you know, only the last 7 days, because otherwise it's a little bit old. You can do all sorts of stuff. So I'll send some stuff out on that. But I would very much recommend that you spend a bit of time doing that, because this is exactly what I use, and people who do those other kind of newsletters do, and then you can see that first. The other thing I tend to use, maybe this is a little bit intense, is I have a load of Google alerts set up. This is most useful if there is a specific scheme that you are particularly looking for, whether it's a grad scheme or there are a couple of you know, grants or, you know, fellowships or things that are relevant for people who are looking for more senior roles, and you don't know when it's going to open up. I have them all set up on a Google alert. Again, it's free. If you just search Google Alerts and you're logged in with your Google account, you can put in the terms that you're looking for. And whenever someone publishes something with that phrase, I get an email, and you can set it up again on various different timescales. I don't have that on real time because that would destroy my inbox. So I just hit a regular one that comes through at midnight each night and goes, here's what's been published today that hits any of the criteria. So if there are specific things that you're looking for, again, I'd recommend doing that. The other thing I did in preparation for this session, which hopefully is useful, I don't know, is if you've thought about all of these things, you've gone, right, here are the jobs sites I'm going to bookmark, I'm going to go to them, I've set up my tweet deck, I'm going to look at that every so often, I'm going to set up these Google alerts. It's just like, how often should you be doing that, right? When should you be looking? So I took all of the jobs that we personally listed on JR last year, and we're like, when do they go up? Anecdotally, I tend to get a lot of emails on a Friday from people who are like, oh, I want to put this up. And I'm like, oh my God, a Friday. And I guess I'd not really thought about it before, that for a lot of places, especially smaller ones, or even people who work in HR and are maybe spending a lot of their week, I don't know, finding people or doing interviews or whatever it is. For a lot of people, like putting a job up is an end of the week kind of thing. And for us at Journo Resources, just as many jobs are listed on a Friday as on a Monday. I don't know if that's surprising to anyone else. I thought it was quite surprising when I noticed it as a trend. Almost 40% of the jobs that we list on Journo Resources are listed in the last 2 days of the week. In reality, I think it would be a higher number if you took all of the jobs across the journalism industry, because our jobs was a little bit skewed because we have our newsletter that goes out on Tuesday, and we kind of always make sure that we're pushing people to get it out for that day. So I would generally say there are a lot of jobs that are going out on a Friday, and that is coupled with the fact that just 4% of jobs that we posted last year closed at a weekend. So if it's open on a Friday, like, trust me when I say no one from HR is coming in on a Sunday morning to like shut that form, or on a Friday evening. Like, if something is open on a Friday, it's gonna stay open for the rest of the weekend. And so my suggestion to you would be, given that a lot are posted towards the end of the week and that things aren't going to close over the weekend, is my routine, if I'm looking for jobs, is to have a look through on a Friday and then apply over the weekend, because that gives me a bit of time to know that it's not going to shut, I'm not going to panic, give it the time it deserves and spend a decent chunk on it without panicking that it is going to close early, and also probably see a lot of new jobs that maybe other people aren't looking for because they didn't necessarily think a load of stuff was going to go up on Friday. Another fact for you that I pulled out just because I thought it was interesting, the average time that jobs were open on Journo Resources last year was 22 days. Obviously there are outliers at either end. I literally just took I did the system where you add them all together and divide it by X, but generally things are open for a decent amount of time. I think we have moved, I think anecdotally again, I think we've moved on from places shutting stuff like after like 4 days because they're really overwhelmed, and we tend to see a lot more people nowadays actually putting warnings on if they are doing a rolling recruitment. We say to people, please put a disclaimer on this. So I'm showing you this, I guess, to say, do take the confidence to give yourself enough time to do something properly. It won't close at a weekend, and you typically do have about 3 weeks to actually kind of put that together. So yeah, that's some stuff around finding jobs and when they typically tend to go up. And then before we kind of go to some questions in about 10 minutes time, I have some stuff about putting your application together. So another thing I did and pulled together, which took way longer than I thought, and it took me like all of the week, but I hope is quite useful, is I looked at how people typically ask you to apply for jobs. Again, I would say this is probably slightly skewed by the fact that at Journo Resources, we don't have some of the bigger players advertising because, again, of those salary requirements. I think if you were to take the whole sector here, I think there would be a bigger chunk of people who are asking for a form rather than just a cover letter and CV to be emailed. But I think the point still stands that a cover letter and CV are really important, and that you should make sure that you are like spending the time to nail them. Because yeah, we found that 77% of ones on our jobs board were asking for a CV and cover letter. Around 20% were asking for a form, and around 3% were wanting the world and wanted you to put both in. So yeah, I would definitely, it was a question that came up quite a lot in previous workshops, and also whenever we've talked about this kind of stuff on LinkedIn, people go, how relevant is the CV and cover letter? I would say still very relevant, even though I think that number is probably in reality a bit smaller. The main thing I would also stress here is that everything should absolutely be able to stand alone. So Jack and I were talking about this afternoon. He's recently been involved in some hiring at his job at Lego, and they've recently changed hiring systems. In the previous hiring system, there's been some interesting instances where he's received the cover letter separately to the CV. I don't think that's a conscious choice, but it's just the way that the system was set up. So he got them separately, and actually it was really important that your CV told the whole story, as did your cover letter, without necessarily referencing each other. But they've just changed to a new system. It's one of those kind of all-in-one HR platforms, and while you are still uploading your cover letter and CV, that's the last bit on the form. That's the bit that's like a little downloadable at the end, and actually everything that came up first was those questions where they typically ask you to put in all of the things that you probably did already know, or if you'd have read the CV. And while it's a pain in the arse, and I definitely, if we were setting up a hiring process at Journo Resources, I wouldn't make you fill out a form where you have to say everything that is already said in your CV. If you do really want the job, I would definitely say, do give everything equal prominence. So do make sure that every part of that application is good, and that you've spent a decent amount of time on it, that it stands alone and is personalized to that job ad. Because I guess the point I'm just trying to round off here is you just don't know what people are going to see and whether they're going to see all of it, which bits are going to have due prominence. So actually spend the appropriate amount of time on all things and make sure they're all personalized to that job, and that they all could be read in their kind of entirety on their own without someone having to go, oh, there's some questions here that I don't know, that I haven't been able to answer, that they should all be good enough that someone maybe wants to go and have a chat with you. I have a couple of tips to follow on CVs and cover letters. We don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to skim through this. Normally I get people to have a bit of a think about what's right and what's wrong with this CV. This obviously is an entry-level CV, but as someone who has been in a hiring position for both entry-level and more senior jobs, it genuinely is the same mistakes that crop up at both levels. And I apologize, it always sounds really basic when I'm talking through some of these things that are right or wrong on a CV, but genuinely they are 99% of the mistakes. Therefore, if you actually can nail all of them, you do put yourself very easily above other people. The bonus point that I always mention with this one is the design on this CV, which isn't a great design. Whenever we talk about this in workshops around CVs, you know, it doesn't really give a lot of prominence to the important things. There's a lot of waste space, many things wrong with it. But the reason I pull this one up is there was a round of hiring I did a couple of years ago where 10% of the CVs used this design, and I was like, oh my god, what is going on? Where is it coming from? And turns out it's just one of the templates on the first page of Microsoft Word, and a load of people have picked it because they were like, oh, looks a bit fancy, I'll go for that. And you don't need to be fancy. The main thing that you need to do is to make sure it's easy to understand why you're great. So don't feel like you need to come up with some fancy template. Just focus on the basics. Like, it doesn't need to look I've just finished laying out our magazine. It doesn't need to look like a magazine. You don't need to crack open InDesign. You know, there might be a reason why you want to design it, but you don't necessarily. So a couple of thoughts that we typically tend to flag with this one, and that I typically tend to see being wrong often. And again, I apologize if this sounds like things you already know, but these genuinely are the things that I see the most often. Always putting your experience above your education, and I'd be really ruthless when it comes to your education as well. Like, especially once you've done that first job, like, it baffles me when someone spent, like, I don't know, 3 years working in a newsroom and they're still telling me what their GCSEs are. Like, I don't need to know. Like, it's great that you did them, but like, cool, like, I want to know the experience that you've done. And even if you are still studying and you are, I don't know, you've done an NCTJ or you've done your journalism BA or masters or whatever it is that you've done, that's really, really great. But that is kind of like the tick box. Like, I need to see that on there, but that's not the thing that makes you stand out. Like, you're on a whole cohort. There are like, what, 30, 40, 50 other people who are in your year who are studying this course at the same time of you. That's not the thing that makes you stand out. Like, as an editor, I want to see it. I want to see that you've done it. But the thing that makes you different is your experience. So always putting that to the top. You would be surprised the amount of CVs I see that don't use bullet points or try and break stuff up. Again, sounds really basic and maybe really a little bit ridiculous, but the reason that I always try and kind of hammer this home is that I never really kind of thought about this until I was faced with having to look through 400 CVs. I time track everything because it just helps me understand how long I take on things and can plan my week better, which is quite important when you're self-employed. And I time tracked how long it took me just to read 400 CVs, and it took me 3 working days. So anything, honestly, that you can do to make it easy for someone to see why you're great really does make a big difference. So think about that with the design, think about it with bullet points. And the thing that I typically tend to advise people to do, both with CVs and with cover letters, which I'll show a little something in a minute of, is I say try and cover up the bottom 2/3, and there should the most interesting stuff, the stuff that is good enough to want to like spark a conversation, should be in the top third. So that's how I would, I don't know, phrase it in your mind. Fill it all out, personalize it, make it great, but then cover up the bottom 2/3 and go, is there enough in that top third? If someone is just glancing through because they're looking through loads, is there enough that they're going to want to still have a chat with me and take me to interview? Yeah, a couple of other bits on here. I will send this through so that you can all have a proper look. The good thing about this is it is just 1 page. I know there's a bit of debate about this. Again, as someone who's had to look through 400, I don't have time to look at the second page of a CV. Might sound harsh, but I think that is broadly true, no matter how much experience you've had. I think this ties in with the idea of personalizing your CV as well. You want to personalize it for every job. So I don't necessarily need all of your 15 years of experience all smushed onto 1 page. The other thing that I tend to not see a lot of, especially at kind of entry level, is people tend to just say tasks they did, not necessarily kind of move that on and talk about examples or impact. So I've put a couple of terrible examples here, which I'm sure we could all write much better. But for example, rather than saying I worked on social media and did stuff on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, like, what did you create? Did you increase followers? Did you increase engagement? Think about all of those things to move it on. Or if you're maybe writing features, link me to one of your features. Did it involve some sensitive interviews? Did you have to, I don't know, do something different? And I see so little of this in CVs and cover letters, really. And I think for me, it's something that really makes it stand out. I want to know what you did and that kind of next level of thinking, rather than necessarily just tasks. So yeah, my 3, I guess, key things. Is it personalized to the job in particular? No one typically tends to personalize the CV. I think you don't have to go, you know, it doesn't have to take you a long time, but actually just going, what bit should go where? What is the most relevant experience to go at the top here? What things do I want to pull out in the bullet points? Do I just want to tweak a couple of words so that they reflect the key skills in the job advert? All of those things don't typically get done. So do that. Make sure it's 1 page. And does it just make it practically like easy for someone to read and go, yeah, this person is interesting. There are a couple of examples. I will skip through them. I will also do this very briefly because I'm aware that I've taken longer to talk than I thought I would. I always do this. But I just wanted to show you, I show this cover letter example all the time, so I'm very sorry if you have seen it before. But if you, quite often when I ask this question, say you're applying for a digital editor job at Lego, how does the cover letter start? Everyone starts by saying the same thing, like, hi, my name is Jem and I'm applying to the role of X, or I saw it on X or whatever. So this is Jack's cover letter. which he sent when he did apply to that digital editor job at Lego. And I just really like showing it because it's just an example of how you could potentially do something differently and make it stand out. So this is a picture of me with my little brother making a glorious mess in my room. We'll be about 9 and 7. I might be a bit older now, but my mindset hasn't changed. Completely different intro into a cover letter. You couldn't do this for every job. So you really want to match the tone of a place you're applying for. But I think what I want to get across is there aren't necessarily rules with cover letters. So if as journalists, you've got a really interesting story about why you love somewhere and it's your dream place to work. Maybe you've got a really interesting thing you want to do when you're there. You can have a different way in to a cover letter. And again, here you'll notice I've only shown you the top third of this cover letter. It has that slightly different intro, and then it goes straight in to talking about things that they've done and some results. So just as a little bit of inspiration about how you might do something a little bit differently. I also put, and I will send you these, just some general notes, which again, might seem quite basic, but these are my kind of observations from having a look at a lot of people's cover letters. Most obvious of all is double checking spellings and names. I worked out from some of the hiring we did, 10% spelled either my name or Journo Resources name wrong, which for me, I try to be quite generous about. But if you are kind of trying to weigh up hundreds, it's a really easy way. Some people just you have to decide somehow between various different applications, and sometimes it can be something as small as that makes the difference. What else I've got there? Again, yeah, hard limit of 1 page, introduction paragraph, 2 paragraphs of in-depth examples, and 1 to wrap it up. And I think the main thing I would say here is that you're never going to hit all of the points in a job description. Don't try, just try and go in depth on 1 or 2 of the main ones. And I'll send this out with a couple of other resources if you want to have a bit more of a deep dive look into those cover letters. But I just wanted to show you that as a little bit of inspiration of how it doesn't just have to be exactly the same in each one. So some final bits before we go to some questions. What I typically tend to see whenever I've been involved in a hiring process, it's probably not clear from this terrible, terrible picture, is that I tend to see a lot of people rushing early on to apply to a job. They don't necessarily apply to the job well when they're rushing to apply to the job. It's only around midway where people have had a little bit of time to think about it and really put their best self forward that I tend to start seeing the good stuff. And then obviously at the end, maybe there's some people who've only just spotted it. So it's a bit of a mixture of really good stuff and people where they've been rushing, which fair play, it's the end. You might as well chuck it in. But just to remind you here, the average time a job is open is 22 days. It's open on a Friday, it's not closing over the weekend. So do give yourself some time, have the confidence to go, I know this job is my dream job, and I know that maybe it might be really popular, but it's better to do it well than to just chuck something in and you kind of ruin your shot, so to speak. So do have the confidence, even if you know it's going to be a really popular job, give yourself just a night to think on it, to think about how you might want to put yourself forward, because genuinely people who typically apply early on have not spent enough time, and it really frustrates me because I'm like, I know that you're probably really great, but you just haven't given yourself the time to actually put this forward well. And then the final thing that I wanted to tell you before we go into some questions is that as well as the digital and SEO skills that I mentioned earlier, ideas generation was one of the most mentioned things on job adverts last year, perhaps not surprising. But I would say something that's actually also very rarely actioned upon in the job application process. And something that I personally, and I obviously can't speak for other hiring managers, but I put quite a lot of weight on when I look through applications. So if you can, always come with an idea. It's something people ask for, but very rarely gets kind of put forward in that application process. I really like it. I think it shows you understand the outlet and you understand what they do. Doesn't have to be a good idea. It just has to be vaguely in the ballpark. When you get the job, you'll probably realize there's an excellent reason that they haven't been doing it haven't been doing it before. But it just kind of shows that you've taken that next step. You've thought about working there, what you might do there. You've got some ideas, you are creative. And like, no one is expecting it to be perfect. They're just looking for a bit of potential. So just think about, at some point in the application process, is there something you can write about, an idea you want to do for them? Is there something you can write about, maybe something you did in the past that you might want to kind of repurpose for them? I'll skip through these examples. These are just some Jack and I have done in applications before. And I will send out this little list, which is kind of like my cheat sheet of ways that you can kind of come up with some ideas. Is there something they could improve on their social media? What are their competitors doing? Is there something you can work into your cover letter? Is there something you can work into one of the questions on that application form? Or is there something you can bring to interview? And I think this is one of the most missed things typically that I tend to see, and also with conversations that I've had with others who have been hiring, sometimes also for quite senior roles, where it's been a reporter role in a specific niche, and only 1 or 2 of the applicants has actually come with an idea of a story that they want to do. So that is a very whistle-stop tour of hopefully some useful data, some useful thoughts that hopefully will be useful in your job hunt. So yeah, my general kind of wrap up would be apply for less things and apply for them better. Pick the things you really want to apply for and do them well, and do be a bit strategic. Try and broaden your outlook if you can. Take the time that you need, and don't feel that you can't ask others for help. So I'm going to stop there because I want to make sure I've got some time to answer some questions. So I will just stop that. I hope that was useful. I realise I've talked a lot. Normally we do this in about an hour and a half, so there's a bit more time. But if anyone does have any questions, now is the time to put them in the chat. I will come to as many as I can. I'll just have a look through the ones that I've got sent in advance as well. It is just me, so do bear with me. But yeah, while I'm looking for 10 seconds at the first question, please do put anything in the chat and then we can get through as many as we can. Cool. What should we go to first? Okay, so one of the questions that we had in advance, it always feels weird when I have to ask these questions to myself. Normally I have someone who does it for me, is how important are national bylines to stand a serious chance when applying for national newspaper grad schemes? This question comes up quite a lot at entry level, and not even necessarily to do with like graduate schemes, but just any kind of entry level job. They're like, do I need to have like got the front page or at the local newspaper, or do I need to have worked somewhere or done something amazing or fantastic? I would say you don't, like, no is the answer. Like, for me, there is more value on doing something original than necessarily doing something that has a big name attached to it, if that makes sense. So whatever kind of job you are applying for, whether that's entry level or whether it's a grad scheme or whatever it is, I would definitely say focus on the things that are original and are unique to you. So I would rather see a really original feature that you wrote for your student paper or your local paper than necessarily a small nib that you managed to get in when you're on work experience. Both of those things still have value, and definitely you want to mention that you've been in that newsroom environment, but I would say it's definitely not a requirement, and I think there is just as much value in those smaller places where you can do more. Okay, loads of questions in the chat. What sort of training and experience do you recommend for people who don't have much social media experience? I think the good thing about social media stuff is that you can pretty much, to a certain extent, do it yourself. On the side of my JR stuff, I run an Instagram account all about swimming pools, outdoor swimming pools. That's something I just set up, and I've been growing kind of in my spare time. That is equally something that you can do, obviously not necessarily about outdoor swimming pools, but if there's something that you want to set up and do, you can just do that. If you are already working in a job, especially if you're working in smaller outlets, smaller places, often you can get involved with those duties and kind of say, oh, can I help out with running X, or I've had an idea, why don't we set up Y? And you can kind of put yourself into those situations. If you're in an entry-level position, other things you could be doing is getting involved with volunteer or community projects, like, you know, even, I don't know, like the community radio station will be putting stuff out on social. Or your student media or whatever it is. So it doesn't have to be necessarily, I guess what I'm saying is it doesn't have to be professional experience in social media. It can be something you set up yourself that you take and treat professionally. It could be that you go and do some volunteering for some kind of charity or student kind of thing, or if you are already working somewhere, there will definitely be a chance to kind of get involved, even if that's just, you know, even if that's just having conversations about how your stories are being sold on social media. So I think about all of those kind of things, and also just making sure that if you want to come in, let's say, for example, you are wanting to propose to somewhere that they set up a TikTok account or whatever it is, actually just using those networks and being able to talk about them fluently, even if you don't actually spend a load of time doing it in a professional setting, actually being able to talk fluently and know how that landscape works, I think it's really important. Okay, tons of questions here. Are there some examples of less popular job titles that are similar to the popular ones? We can definitely pull some out in particular. Off the top of my head, anything to do with audience development, engagement, producer, all of those things typically don't tend to do so well. But what I can do is I have the analytics page open right now, so we can definitely pull some of those examples and send them out with the recording in a couple of days' time as well. But typically I would say it's anything that isn't the standard. So, you know, if it isn't reporter, if it isn't editorial assistant, if it isn't editor, typically people aren't necessarily looking. So people aren't looking as much at researcher or research assistant. They aren't looking at producers typically on Journo Resources. What was the other one I just said? But anything, yeah, that's a bit behind the scenes, anything that doesn't fit into that, but I will pull out some examples for you. Should experience be chronological on the CV? I think it depends. That is perhaps the most standard way of doing things. But I think there are sometimes reasons for doing it slightly differently. We did a workshop, so Jack did a workshop last week, maybe, about career changing and maybe switching out of journalism or widening your interest in doing something differently. That might be an instance in which you might want to have a skills focused CV instead. So maybe if you're thinking about that, or equally if maybe you're freelance and you're then thinking, I want to apply for an in-house role, again, that might be an instance in which I would suggest maybe going for a skills focused approach. So I would take it dependent on your particular circumstances and dependent on what the role is you're applying for. Typically, I normally tend to chuck in chronological, but yeah, if you're changing careers, maybe if the most relevant experience is actually quite buried further down, or if you're freelance, again, there is no problem with doing that in a more skills-based kind of way. What you basically want is to have the most relevant stuff for the job that you're applying for in the top third. So I would say it doesn't have to be. And if that doesn't make sense for you and the experience that you have, or you've got like a gap in your kind of experience levels, you know, that's fine. Do it in the way that kind of works best for you. And again, I'll write down that I'll try and dig out some good examples of some skills CVs that we can share with you as well. Oh God, okay, gonna try. Hopefully I'm answering these questions, by the way, and sorry if I'm not. Feel free to just tell me if I haven't quite hit the point. Is there an advantage to applying early for a job even when the application is not rushed and you know the deadline is in a few weeks' time? So I think the balance here, and I think what I was trying to stress, is that genuinely I do just see when I have put it out is that they just genuinely have been rushed. And if you are confident that you have done the best job that you that you can. Put it in when it's ready, you know, put it in on a time scale that works for you. But I do think having seen them, just make sure that you're confident that you've done the best thing. You know, I can't promise that some places won't shut it early. I think it's more rare that happens now than it used to. I can't promise that won't happen. I can't promise that some places won't you know, decide that they're going to stop looking halfway through. But I guess what I wanted to stress is that it is much better to put it in a couple of days later. I'm not necessarily advocating that you know, carefully craft it and go, I'm not going to put this in until 5 minutes before the deadline, because that would be ridiculous. But actually just giving yourself a night to think about it, giving yourself maybe 24 hours, just to, you know, it's a thing where maybe, I don't know if everyone else got told this in your GCSEs, where they were like, you know, read the whole booklet, the whole exam first, because then your brain starts working on it, and by the time you get to the question, like in half an hour's time, you've already like kind of passively started to think about it without you even realizing. So I think it's more about that, is what I'm trying to stress, is actually look at it, see it, start noodling on it, and just give yourself a day before you put it in, and then make sure that a couple of people have looked at it. So probably, you know, you might feel better, you know, maybe there is a slight benefit to putting it in slightly earlier than right at the last minute, but just make sure you give yourself that time. Okay, cool. We've got 2 more. I would take those, and if anyone's got any last questions, chuck them in now, because we're almost at time. But yeah, pop any questions in now so that I make sure that I get to them. So the question here is, this person has many years of work experience, but it's very diverse, and was all in a different country. So everything from being an accountant to writing fiction scripts. Now has a master's degree in journalism. Is it a good idea to include all the different experiences in the CV? And are entry-level jobs in journalism the right category for me, since I have work experience? So 2 different questions there. So I think the first one, which I'll take first, is if you have a range of different experiences which don't necessarily relate to journalism, do you want to include them all in your CV? So I'll take that first. Generally, I would say, yes, you do want to include elements of those experiences. It might not be all of them. I think this is maybe most relevant to what I was saying about skills-based jobs, skills-based CVs, sorry, and picking the things that are most relevant. So there will be things that are really relevant from a job as an accountant, but there'll be things that aren't relevant. So be really quite conscious, choose consciously about what bits that you include, and kind of maybe approach that as more of a skills-based CV, because I think there's a danger in that kind of instance, if you just list everything chronologically, that people will go, hang on, how does this all tie together? So maybe approach that from more of a skills perspective, to talk about how that comes together and tell the story of how all of these things make you uniquely well placed to do that. I will also send, I'll write the note for this as well. We did a couple of really good workshops a little while ago, which kind of touched on this idea of how to sell different kinds of experience from non-journalism jobs in when you are applying for that. So I will send that workshop out to everyone else as well, in case that is relevant. I will also send a workshop which kind of ties into that second question of, if you are kind of switching to journalism from a different industry, do you have to settle for an entry-level job? I would say if you do have some experience, you don't, but it's just about the way that you sell that, and I would really focus in on those skills. It might be, of course, you can't jump in and be the editor of a publication, but I would say if you do have experience from a different sector, and you can pull out areas that you think and areas and skills that are useful, I would definitely say that you can definitely come in a few rungs up. And again, we've got some specific resources on that, so I will send that in. And then final question, it says, if I'm including a link to my personal blog in my CV or cover letter, will the recruiter really go and check it, or are there better ways for me to showcase my articles to stand out than just providing them a link to see everything? So question here is, if you put a link to your blog or your articles or whatever it is someone going to go and check it? Maybe not. I think it's about how you sell it. I think I am much less like, this is just me personally, I can't speak for everyone. I'm much less likely to just click on a link at the top that says like gemcollins.co.uk, like see my portfolio here. I'm like, oh, I don't have time to do that. Like I've got this whole rest of stuff to look through. What I am more likely to look at is kind of like those bullet points we were talking about earlier, where if you're saying like, I freelanced and I wrote this specific piece here, and I interviewed this person and did XYZ, and it involves sensitive interviewing skills, and you've really sold it to me in that bullet point, and there's a link over that, I'm going to be like, yeah, that sounds super interesting. Like I'm going to go and have a look at it. Or to give you another example, on our fellowship the year before last, someone applied who ran their own blog, which was about different types of relationships. So that relationships that weren't the standard kind of male-female couple that you typically tend to see in the media, and they'd done loads of really interesting interviews with people in all different types of relationships in many different forms, and they'd really told me the story of what that was in the bullet points, where they were like, I run this blog and these are the kind of people that I spoke to and this is why I've done it, and I was like, that's super interesting, I'm going to click on it. So I guess for me, it would be about selling that within the context of the CV or the cover letter. So rather than just putting a link or a QR code or whatever it is on the top and expecting someone to go to it, give them a reason to go to it. So talk about a specific story in the bullet points that you've written that you really want to highlight that they look at, or if it's a particular project or a particular blog, talk about what it is, why you set it up, what you've been doing. And those instances for me are the ones where I typically tend to look through. So yeah, sorry, I've talked so much at you all for just an hour. I hope that was useful. We will send you the slides. I will send you the recording, the slides. I've written down everything that I have promised to send you, and we'll get that to you within the next 48 hours. It's typically how long we tend to do those. And yeah, thank you so much. Hopefully we'll see you at something else in the future. And if there is anything at all that we haven't answered, my email is gem@journoresources.org.uk. So feel free to drop us an email and I will try and answer that for you then. But in the meantime, have a lovely rest of your evening, and yeah, hopefully see you at something virtually again soon. Thanks guys.